my witnesses. This is a story of movement, but it's also a story of community. Rapid growth, real tension, more voices, more needs, more opportunities to serve. Not everyone saw things the same way. Not everyone felt hurt. But the mission was too important to let division win. Different gifts, one body. Not spotlight, but service. Not preference, but purpose. This isn't just their story, it's ours. An invitation to belong, an invitation to serve, an invitation to grow together. The same spirit, the same mission, the same call. The story isn't over, it's just beginning.
Well, good morning, Redmond Assembly. If we haven't met before, my name is Maggie, and I am just thrilled to be able to share with you this morning. We are continuing on in our Acts series where we have been studying the progress of the early church, what happened after Jesus ascended back into heaven, but he left his followers with the mission to tell the world about him. We saw how Pentecost happened, and Peter preached this message, and the believers, they were filled with the Spirit and empowered to do what God called them to do. Peter and John, they've been traveling around sharing the good news, but also getting in some really tough situations, often getting thrown into prison, and yet God has provided a way out for them every time. Last week, we saw the vulnerable early church, and we saw Ananias and Sapphira try to lie to God, and that was a really bad choice that cost them their life, but God was being protective over this new church that he has plans and purposes for. And today, as we continue on in chapter 6, we see the church kind of going through some growing pains as they're developing, needing to change, raising up some more leaders. And growing pains aren't fun. That's why they're called pains, right? My boys are 8 and 6, and I feel like we constantly have growing pains. They're constantly getting longer legs, and the pants, we have to go get new pants, and even their torsos are getting longer because their shirts aren't long enough, and their heads are growing because their sweatshirts get stuck on their heads, and it's just a constant process of, oh my goodness, we need new clothes again. And I feel like I'm constantly telling them, well, if your knees hurt, you're probably growing, and they've heard it so much that they now say it to each other. One of them will complain, and they'll be like, brother, you're growing. Like, it's just, you're growing. It's painful, but it leads to progress, right? It leads to the next thing. We have to go through these phases to get to where it is that we're supposed to go. Growth doesn't happen without a little bit of struggle. And that's kind of what we're looking at today. Well, before we jump into the scripture, if you guys could stand with me one more time, we're going to pray and just ask God to help us as we hear this message. God, I thank you for your word that's living and active, that it's never something that isn't applicable to us or something we outgrow, but anytime we open your word, we can find something that just hits us where we're at, God. And I pray that as we hear this message, it will sink into our hearts and that our feet will live it out this week as we go in your name. Well, go ahead and give a high five to your neighbor as you sit. Maybe tell them what you did for Valentine's Day, or maybe someone gave you a fun treat. Rob and I got to celebrate Valentine's Day last night with a group of kids in our church. We hosted Parents' Night Out, and it wasn't a big group, but we had a fun group. We did an epic toilet paper war. I don't know if you saw the video on social media. We put a little Instagram video, but yeah, we had toilet paper all over the gym last night. It was a blast. It was a really good time. Great way to spend Valentine's Day. Well, like I said, we are in Acts chapter 6. Verse 1, we're just going to look at the very beginning part of verse 1 here, but it says in verse 1, as the believers rapidly multiplied, there were rumblings of discontent. The church has existed for like a whole 10 minutes at this point, it seems like, and already there is rumblings of discontent. Already there's a problem of some sort. And you know, there's a cliche that people say of more people, more problems. And that kind of seems to be happening. But really the issue with the church is people is the purpose, are the mission. So if more people are more problems, naturally there's going to be some problems, but we have to face them head on with some wisdom. These rumblings of discontent, often when people are discontent, it can sometimes lead to other people getting hurt, other people being ostracized, or there to be tension within a situation. And this isn't even what my message is completely on this morning, but I want to take a moment just to recognize that sometimes this is where we get church hurt. And as believers, it's not if we get hurt by the church, but really when. Because we are people, and even though if we're a Jesus follower, we've been saved and we're heading towards becoming more like Jesus, until we get to heaven, we all have sin. And unfortunately, that still comes between Jesus followers. And if we've had hurt from something happen in the church, that's not a badge to keep on our arms and just to label ourselves. I think we're so quick to label like, well, I have hurt. But that's something we can give back to Jesus and to seek his healing and his ability to move into our lives. Because we are called to do life in community. That the answer for rumblings, for discontent, for hurt isn't to keep ourselves on an island ostracized away, but yet to still engage. Because that's what we're told to. And in Hebrews chapter 10, it says, don't neglect meeting together, that it's important, that we're meant to do this thing together. And I think if I were honest with myself, I would say sometimes I would think I could follow Jesus by myself. Hanging out with God one-on-one, that sounds pretty good because he's perfect, but that wasn't his plan. He designed the church as a body with multiple parts. And just as a human body has growing pains, the church body can have growing pains too. It won't be perfect until heaven, but until then we press on, following Jesus' example, doing the best we can to be in healthy community. And it might sound cheesy, but we can't spell community without you. Without you. That we all have a place in it. And as we look to the example of Jesus, we've all failed Jesus, and yet he continually loves and forgives us. And that's my heart for our church too, that as we are on this journey together, that we walk in that way of loving and forgiving and continuing on doing the best we have to do, not giving up on each other. Eugene Peterson, who was famous for writing the Message paraphrase of the Bible, he uses this analogy of the church as being like an extended family, where he says God's children do different things. Some run away from it and they pretend the family doesn't exist. Some move out and get an apartment on their own from which they kind of hang out over there, but if it's a holiday, they come back and join in, showing up for the parties. Some would never dream of leaving, but cause others to dream it for them, for they are always criticizing what is served at the meals, quarreling about the housekeeping, complaining about others. But some determine to find out what God has in mind by placing them in community called church. They learn how to function in it harmoniously and joyously and develop the maturity that is able to share and exchange God's grace with those who might otherwise be viewed as nuisances. That it is like a family sometimes that might have a little bit of dysfunction, but the love of God is what draws us together to continue on for his purposes. And the early church, they're kind of finding each other nuisances. And actually a little more than that, it's almost verging on racism as we continue on with Acts 6:1. It says the Greek-speaking believers complained about the Hebrew-speaking believers, saying that their widows were being discriminated against in the daily distribution of food. So there's multiple problems actually going on here. We have these two ethnic groups of people within this same church who are kind of judging each other and they're not seeing eye to eye. But then they're also having issue with this program, this food feeding program, which interestingly is not the main mission of the church, right? The main mission of the church is to go into the world, to tell people about Jesus, to make disciples. But this program has now really captured people's attention where they're not so much right now thinking about the mission of the church, but they're thinking about their issues with the program. So multiple problems here. The complaints and the discrimination between the believers is more than just a race and language barrier, but the Greek-speaking believers were walking in Hellenistic or Greek customs, different styles of dress, different way of thinking, different philosophy. And the Hebrew believers, they would have been remaining true to what they viewed as the old tradition. And there was kind of this conflict where the Hebrew believers were thinking they were the more spiritual ones by continuing on in this traditional manner. So it's fascinating. The church has barely begun, and yet we already have a conflict of traditional versus contemporary. How in the world? You know, it's barely begun, and there's already this age-old conflict that we can see throughout history happen in the Bible. I was watching Leave It to Beaver with our kids the other day, actually. That was just a great show, if you have not watched it for a while. And we were cracking up because this show takes place in the 50s, and yet in the show, Beaver gets mortified because he has a great aunt who comes to visit, and she redresses him almost looking like a newsboy from the 20s, and he's embarrassed to go to school because he's not dressed for his culture, his time, and he's so frustrated with this old idea of how to look. And it was just so funny to me because the whole show now is super old, and yet it's the same things that we face. I remember the first time I was allowed to wear jeans on a platform as a kid. I think I was middle school, maybe. Anyway, my grandparents were pastors, and they did this Christmas production each year, and this was like the year they decided we're all gonna wear jeans and we're gonna see how it goes over. And I think it went over fine. I actually don't know if they got any like backlash, but I remember it being a big deal that we wore jeans. I mean, it was nice jeans with like heels still, but we were wearing them, you know? And it happens, this traditional versus contemporary clash. And isn't it funny how sometimes those things can steal our attention when that's really not what matters? Those are organizational questions that have nothing to do with the spiritual mission, and yet it can grab our focus. And it's not supposed to. Styles of dress, colors, these things change. But what shouldn't change is how we love the people around us. And here at Redmond AG, we have made changes in a year, and we will probably continue to make changes, but what never changes is the mission. The mission to love people, to tell people about Jesus, to proclaim the good news. But the means of doing that, the methods of doing that, they sometimes have to shift. And the early church was already starting to make some shifts. This program that was stealing their attention, they were realizing we need more people to step up and help lead us. That we're growing, we need more help. We need more people, we need something new. And their all-time church mission was the same, but they needed to make a method change for the day in and day out. If we still used the same service outline that the disciples used in Acts, it would feel a little weird. If we all showed up to eat together around a table and sat on the floor and used our fingers and sang songs in Aramaic, would be a little out of touch. That sometimes shifts have to happen. And in Acts 6:2, we see that they've realized they need to make a change. So the 12 calls a meeting of all the believers, and they said, we apostles should spend our time teaching the word of God, not running a food program. So they're realizing we have been taking on all this responsibility. We've been doing these different things, but we need to call up some other leaders to step in to help out. This is a foundational church organizational concept here that the apostles have determined they really must involve more people to support the ministries that were happening in the church. So in Acts 6:3-7, it says, and so brothers, select 7 men who are well respected and full of the Spirit and wisdom, and we will give them this responsibility. Then we apostles can spend our time in prayer and teaching the word. Everyone liked this idea, and they chose the following: Stephen, a man of faith in the Holy Spirit, which we are spending next week, like all on Stephen. If you've read chapter 6, you know that it kind of makes a shift to introduce Stephen. come back next week. We're going to spend all next week on Stephen. He has a great story. Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas of Antioch, an earlier convert of the Jewish faith. These 7 were presented to the apostles, who prayed for them and laid their hands on them. The apostles, they had a problem and they found a solution. And I love that I want to be a person who, when there's a problem, I don't just dwell on the problem, but that I can find a solution or bring a solution to the table. This passage reminds me a lot of another one in Romans, where Paul writes a letter to the church in Rome, and he gives more teaching on this important concept of people working together to accomplish the mission. And he's actually writing to a similar cultural time period that the church in Rome had some division. It had some clash between Roman believers and yet the Jewish believers, and how they didn't exactly see eye to eye. And he writes to them the importance of harmony and the fact that they are one body working together for a common purpose. So what Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, verses 4 and 5, he says, just as our bodies have many parts and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body and we all belong to each other. The church desperately needs every person's gifts, abilities, and passions, because we're all different, and yet when we come together, it makes us that much stronger and more powerful. You know, imagine the skeletal system. If you were to take out a chunk of the skeletal system, like the tibia or the femur, which honestly I don't remember what bones those are. I think they're arm and legs. But if you were to take one out, it falls apart. It can't do its purpose of working together. I remember I took anatomy and physiology in college. I was a psychology major, and they required us to take a lab science. So I thought anatomy would be easier than chemistry, which I think was right. But it is only by the grace of God that I passed anatomy, because it was the weed out class for the nursing program. And so they made it really hard. And I didn't even want to be there doing it, but they made us like label. They would give us like one bone, and they would be like, label the parts of this bone. And I'm like, I don't know. It's a bone. Like, you want me to label the parts within it? Like, by itself, it looks like a whole lot of nothing. Like, you give me one chunk of bone, and I'm just not the science-minded person to know all the little details about it. But I know that when it goes with other things, it makes a lot more sense to me. And that's how it is with God's body, that together the purpose can be established. The church needs the parts that we all bring. But it's kind of an interesting tension, because we want to develop our gifts and our strengths and our passions, but we also have to realize that it's not about us as singular individuals. And I had a hard time kind of discovering this, in my early adulthood journey, because you hear so much, especially as a young adult, like, what do you want to do? Like, what's your path? What's your dream? What's your goal? And you can become, without realizing it, a little bit self-focused, because you're trying to determine, well, what do I want? What am I good at? What is my vocation? And God did create us with natural giftings and abilities. And while we discover that, we also have to realize that we're doing it for his purpose. So it's kind of this tension of, I need to discover how I've been created, but I also do that discovery journey realizing that it's not about me at the end of the day, but what I can do for him. And that's a hard place to sometimes wrestle with, that it's for the purpose of service, not self-importance, that we use our gifts and abilities. And here at Redmond AG, as we are doing this together, going through this process together, we want to keep the main thing, like I said, of preaching the word, our mission of creating authentic experiences for people to be transformed by Jesus. And the main avenue that we do that through is Sunday mornings, where we elevate applicable Bible teaching, safe and fun kids ministry, and authentic worship. And that those are the 3 legs of really the stool that supports our mission, and that anything we do has to correlate to that, has to support that mission or we don't do it. We don't want to get sidetracked by other things that could be good, but we want to focus on what is most important. What is the mission? We don't want to get sucked into just that doing more is better, but we want to be intentional. If you've ever found yourself saying the church should do blank, maybe that's something on your heart as an area for you to step up into, for you to lead within. And as a team, we want everybody to feel empowered to do what they're passionate about. And we want to be able to apply resources to those things. But we can't allow various missions to take over. It has to be the mission. And if something that's really passionate in your soul that maybe doesn't quite fit here, maybe that's an opportunity to go out into the community. Or the church is more than just our one church as Redmond Assembly, but we have a global church, believers all over the world with abilities to plug in and pour in. Maybe sometimes we have to think about how to best apply our gifts and talents, and maybe that is in one place, or maybe it's in another. The things God puts on our heart about how we can be involved might make our church and community better. And we need to wrestle through that of how am I using my gifts? And I think a great prayer is that God will place on our hearts the things that we should do and how we should function in his kingdom for his glory. Because we have to pursue his heart above our own. That the church exists for God's purposes, not man's. And we have to be careful when pursuing our passions, like I said, that we don't become too self-focused, but that we're allowing him to guide us as we're figuring out how to serve him. I was thinking of when I was a kid, I was involved in lots of different kinds of music, but particularly choirs was something I did all the way through. In 5th grade, I had a 0-period choir class, actually. I was fortunate to go to an elementary school that really elevated music. And then I did choir in middle school and high school, and again in high school did 0-period choirs. And I would have thought as I grew up that my way to serve the church would have been in music. And yet God kind of took me on this whole other path when I went to college and I started taking classes, and professors were seeing in me this speaking ability. And they started to kind of nurture that and provide opportunity for that. And as I listened to the Lord, he led me in a whole different direction than I would have ever expected. And that's, again, that tension where we're in that, yes, we do have different gifts, but we have to be listening to how God wants us to use them, to how we should be led. Because I think it's a dangerous place when we tell God how we're going to serve God. I don't think he likes that very much. I think we have to enter into this with humility and take inventory of what is driving us. Is it my ego or is it my heart to serve? So all of this in mind, this realization that the church takes all of us, but this tension of wanting to develop gifts but not wanting to be self-focused, then how are we supposed to do this? How am I supposed to best be in community? Well, I think number one is that we have to surrender ourselves, first of all, to Jesus. Have to surrender to Jesus. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 says, "And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." It's a hard pill to swallow, but I have to realize that me on my own doesn't think right. I don't think like God thinks. I have to continually feed my mind with his word so that my mind can build the correct pathway so that my thought will go the direction he wants me to go. That it's a constant daily choice to renew my mind to submit to him so that I can best live for him. And that's actually really good news, because when we allow God to do that, his way is better. And he takes us places that are better than we could have ever dreamed up or imagined for ourselves, because he is so good. So we first surrender. But then number two, we also have to just ask the Lord, how do you want to use me? We humble ourselves and ask. because he has gifted all of us uniquely. Romans 12 verses 6 and 8 says, in his grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. So if God's given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you're a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. That passage lists 7 different kinds of gifts. And that first one, prophecy, I think sometimes we get hung up on that, of not being sure what it is. Is it knowing very specific information about people? Sometimes. But honestly, prophecy at its base meaning is declaring truth, which I think can sometimes help us make better sense of that. So we have prophecy, which is declaring truth. We have service, teaching, encouraging, giving, leadership, and kindness. And we hear those gifts and we think, well, those are kind of general. But I think that's on purpose. I think these gifts are listed as general, kind of what we would think of as traits, because that is something anybody can do. Anybody can do any of those things. It doesn't matter our age. It doesn't matter our socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter our education. Any of us can operate in those gifts. And one thing we love to say here is, as long as you have a pulse, you have a purpose. And that God has gifts for you to operate in and ways that you can serve and love other people. When I was in 6th grade, I started learning how I could use my gifts to serve the church. It was about 2003, I think, and I was terrified to go to youth group. Wednesday nights freaked me out. I was small as a 6th grader, like I was real short, and I would walk into our middle school room, which I think ran about 120 middle schoolers. It was very large, it was very loud, and goth punk was in. Like, this was the era of Avril Lavigne, and like girls were wearing really dark makeup, and everything was black and white, checked with studs on it, and I was still wearing kid clothes from the old Navy section, okay? Like, I didn't fit. I was like square peg, round hole. I did not fit in my youth group. I didn't like it. I just didn't feel like I connected. So my parents actually allowed me to serve in the threes class on Wednesday nights while I was just in this period of adjustment and not liking it. And in serving in the threes, I worked with some other adults who didn't just treat me as like this other kid in the room, but they gave me the opportunity to teach, to lead, to pour into these 3-year-olds. And I started discovering as a 6th grader, I can lead, I can teach, I can tell these 3-year-olds about Jesus. I can help them get to the bathroom. I can help them with their craft. You know, I can serve in my church. And now I don't think every 6th grader should have done that. I don't think that would have been the answer. But for me, this was an important growing moment of realizing how I, even though I was young, could be involved. In a commentary I was reading, the writer talked about this idea of gift projection. Like, if me as a 6th grader had thought all 6th graders should do the same thing, that would have been me projecting my ideals onto everybody else. And he writes, you know, the problem is we have a tendency towards gift projection, of seeing everything in terms of our own individual motivational gift. Often we wonder why everyone does not see the same need we see or feel the same way we do. Instead of using our gifts to complement one another and to build up the body, we grow frustrated when that which we view as crucial is not the top priority for everybody else. And I think we can all sometimes get sucked into that, the idea of like, well, I see this, how come you don't see this way? And I was just thinking of an example of in my marriage. This is a sponge. And it is a miracle that I found it this morning on my kitchen sink because I treat sponges as disposable items. I don't like them. Usually I use the sponge once and it's gone. I throw it away because is that not disgusting? It's discolored and crunchy and it probably smells. But Rob likes to have sponges around. And we discovered this early on in our marriage that we would buy sponges and he would say, "Where did the sponge go?" And I would say, "Well, I threw it away because it's gross." And he would think, "No, that's a waste. I use that sponge to clean the counter and blah, 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 etc." And I wish I could say we reached some sort of agreement about sponges. We have not. No, this is an ongoing sponge issue that we do not see eye to eye. I think they are disgusting. He thinks they're useful. And we probably won't agree. But that's okay. I think there's some times when we to live in harmony, agree to disagree, where we realize that just as humans, I'm gonna see things one way, you're gonna see things another way. And when it's on things like matters of opinion, we gotta choose to set those aside for the greater purpose. Because as a church, the mission is telling people about Jesus, creating authentic experiences for people to be transformed by Jesus. And while we might disagree on the sponges, we have to allow our gifts to still work together towards that common overarching purpose. We all have different ways of doing things. Everybody's unique and each church is unique. We're unique from other churches in our town, and that's okay. That's okay, how we function differently. It actually makes it very beautiful. You know, if you were to get involved in serving here at Redmond Assembly, some things that you would hear about our church, about how we choose to do this in a unique way, are some of our top values. One of those is purpose over preference. That is a huge value to us. So big that we've actually done 2 different sermon series on the concept of purpose over preference. That as we move through life together in community, that we are constantly aiming for God's purposes over our own preferences, that we constantly choose to lay that aside. You know, sometimes Rob does not like a song that Ben picks. That even happened this morning. But he chooses to lay aside his own preferences for God's purposes. Another thing you'll hear is we celebrate developing over doing. And I love this because it really ties into what we saw in Acts chapter 6, that the apostles realized, I can't do this all. I can't do all the ministries of the church. We got to get more people. And we want to be that kind of place as well, that we develop other leaders to step in to lead different areas on purpose, because that is how the mission can best be accomplished. That in kids ministries, Karen doesn't lead every message, but she has been growing up other leaders who can teach the kids messages. That Ben doesn't lead worship every Sunday because he's developing other leaders to help lead worship. That is intentional. We celebrate developing over doing. And another thing we like to say is we hold things loosely. It's not just a 38 special song. It's an important organizational principle that we don't just hang on to all the little things that might have worked at one point in time, but that we're open to where God's Spirit might be leading and moving as we search for how to best serve our community. And in order to do that, like I said, we can't spell community without you. We need you. We need all of us working together. Maybe you're that missing femur or tibia or patella or whatever bone might need to be filled in the blank. Maybe that's you. We need those unique giftings. We need the eyes that see things different than what we see. And even if it doesn't quite fit right away, we want to wrestle through that together. How can we best build each other up and support each other on our mission? Because people are the purpose, and it's so much bigger than just any one of us. Maybe God stirred something in your soul already this morning of a way where you could be involved, maybe a way where you can bring a solution here or in the community, maybe a solution within the capital C church, the church all over the world. Maybe God will call you to missions, to involvement in parachurch organization, to ministry, maybe to plant, be a part of a church plant. I don't know what God's stirring in your heart now or what he might stir in your heart someday. But we know that he has a purpose and a plan for you as a part of his body of believers. So if you want to grab that connection card, there's actually a space for you to just write things. And if there is something that's stirring in your heart, we'd love to know about it. That if you want to write that on there, or maybe you feel like God might be leading you somewhere, but you don't have a specific direction, you can write that on there as well. Any one of our team members, we'd love to connect with you this week to kind of talk about that. Maybe you feel like God has something for you, but you're not sure what it is. Or maybe you do feel something very specific. Write that down. We want to connect with you. We want to hear about what God is putting on your heart. The early apostles, they made a smart organizational move, allowing other people to be involved. They allowed people to step in and support the mission. And then this beautiful harmony starts being achieved when multiple people's gifts are used to advance the mission. And so we see in Acts 6-7, Ben. 6-7. Yeah. If I was in kids, I would have lost the whole room just then. Luckily, I'm not. So we see God's message continued to spread. The number of believers greatly increased in Jerusalem, and many of the Jewish priests were converted too. I love that. One verse that might be easy to gloss over, but when the church is functioning as the church is intended, when the parts are together, the mission advances. It grows in ways that they could not have imagined, because together they're pursuing the mission, the call that God has for them. And that's my prayer for us as well. And not that because numbers are the point, but as we also like to say here, that every number has a name, every name has a story, and every story matters to God. That's why the mission is so crucial for growth, for advancing the kingdom. Now, if you look at the connection card as well, we also have some other ways to respond. The first box is always, I choose to follow Jesus today for the first time. And if that's you, please mark that. We want to connect with you, provide resources. We can get you a Bible, help support you as you're beginning this journey. Because again, that first step was that we have to submit to Jesus. In order to know how to best be a part of community, we have to submit to his design for our lives. And it's so good. It's so good when we choose that. Next, I need to ask God what my role is in the church community. Maybe that's something you haven't done. We can start there. Or number 3, I want to develop my gifts and strengths in community. Maybe that's an intentional step you'll make this week. Or I will use my gifts and strengths this week for God's purposes. Well, before we close in another time of worship, let's just take a moment to pray. Ask God to just reveal to us how we are to be in this body of believers. God, we thank you so much that you created each and every one of us unique and on purpose and for a purpose. And that your purposes for our lives are good. That's something we can build our life on with encouragement, with excitement, that you have purposes greater than what we could even ask or imagine. That while it may be difficult, you are always with us. And I pray as we go about this week that we would be seeking your heart for us in community. How can we love those around us? How can we serve those around us? How can we obey and follow you with a heart of humility and gratitude for all you have done in our lives and all you are going to do? And I just ask for your blessing like it was on the early church. May it be on us as well, God. May your mission advance. May your gospel go forward. May many more people know how much you really, truly love them. Would you please stand as we close in a time of worship?
Come on, stand to your feet. I love that, like half of you. Oh wait, not yet, Levi, not yet.